My heroes were the big megachurch pastors, you know, the Rick Warrens and the Bill Hybels. My whole identity was wrapped up in being the rock star youth pastor that could snap his fingers and hundreds of kids would give their life to Jesus. I'm saying to them, but the Bible says this, the Bible says that. And they're like, well, that's just your interpretation of the Bible. We've got our scholars and they say, this is okay. He got to the part and he goes, Jesus took bread, he gave it to his disciples and he said, take this represents my body. And I felt like the Lord speaking to me going, you know, that's not what I said. Wow. It led to a very, very dark time because I felt like I wanted to be Catholic. I felt like it was the truth, but I didn't feel like I could do it. Like the rich young ruler who went away sad. So I said no.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Lila Rose Show. Today I'm sitting down with Keith Nestor, who is the founder and the head of Down to Earth Ministry. He is a podcaster, he's an author, and he has a really amazing faith story. His whole world is how to share the faith with people that aren't already in the faith and be a witness for the love of Christ. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're here on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed and hit that notification bell. And you guys, we just launched Supercast, where I have something called the Rose Report, which is this growing community of people who are passionate about our mission to bring goodness, truth, beauty into the media marketplace. And you can check that out at rosereport.supercast.com. So thank you so much, Keith, for sitting down with me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's funny because I had on Alex, who we both know.
Yes.
And a bunch of people were saying like, Keith, you know, he was talking about you and a bunch of people were like, you got to have on Keith. You've got to talk to Keith. You know, you've impacted so many people with your work. So I'm excited that you're here and excited to dive in with you.
Well, that was funny because that interview with Alex came out and I started getting my phone blown up by people that had seen the clip where he was talking about me. And they're like, you got to watch this. And I looked at it and I'm like, oh, that was nice of him to say that. And literally within 10 minutes, I was getting a call from your producer about coming out here and doing this.
Amazing.
I thought that was okay.
Amazing.
Let's go.
We move fast around here and you do too. So great. And you came out from Iowa, right?
Yeah, I live in Northeast Iowa.
Nice.
So yeah, it's a nice little flight out here to where you are. And I'm just thankful for the opportunity to be here.
Awesome. Well, welcome. And your story caught my eye because honestly, I related to it a lot. Not me personally, because I'm not you and I was not a pastor and doing the things you do. But my dad actually was an elder in our church and he was on this huge faith journey. And I think your faith journey makes you uniquely, I think, capable of sharing about the faith with people from all different backgrounds. We're passionate about faith on the podcast. People know I talk about it all the time. Everyone knows, you know, faith is the most important thing to me. But I'd love to just start with, who is Keith Nestor? Where you came from? Was faith always important to you? And we're going to get into all the things.
Sure. Well, I grew up going to church. My dad is a retired pastor. So church was always a part of my life ever since I was a little boy. But I gave my heart to Jesus at church camp, you know, like a lot of Protestant kids do. Going to church camp was a big part of my life. And I remember at 10 years old, going down front at an altar call and praying, accepting the Lord. And so in Iowa. Yeah. So I grew up with that understanding of I'm all about Jesus, you know, and of course, like a lot of people, you have your zigs and zags, but that was the driving force of my life, really. That and music, you know, music was something I was really interested in. I played drums in bands since I was a kid. And that was something that was my goal in my life, was to do music. So that took me out to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania when I was 19. I dropped out of college to go out and play drums in this band out there. But while I was out there, I started going to a Calvary Chapel church, which is, you know, really big on verse by verse Bible study, which I grew up Methodist. So more mainline Protestant denomination. So when I started going to Calvary, it really felt like, oh, this was my jam, you know, contemporary music, hard hitting verse by verse Bible teaching. And I just loved it to the point where I started to spend more time and energy thinking about the church than I was even the music that I was doing. And eventually I had a situation where I wanted to rededicate my life to the Lord, not just give my heart to Jesus, but my life. And I had this feeling that God was going to do something different with me. And I remember I prayed this prayer. I said, God, if you want me to do something different in my life, I will do it. Just show me what it is.
Show me. Ugh.
Dangerous prayer, Lila.
Dangerous prayer.
And
you know, just do what you want with me, God. And then bam.
So I think for a lot of people, and I think people can relate to this, you have your dreams and your goals and your ideas for your life, and you ask God to bless that. And we live in this place where we think, if I do the stuff that I'm supposed to do, then God will do the stuff that I want him to do for me. And that was certainly part of my life.
When you say music, you're like, I want to be, you know, a rock star. Like that was it. Like I'm going to be.
That was the dream.
Like what kind of rock star was it? Like a Red Hot Chili Peppers rock star?
Well,
I could see that. I don't know.
maybe, I don't know. You know,
different.
I played in lots of different kinds of bands, you know, more like
Country?
not country,
Okay,
not
okay.
country. Probably a shock to people, but I played in some like heavier bands. But the band I was in Philadelphia was it was like a modern rock kind of a band. This
Okay.
is back in the 90s, so you know, this is more like modern rock kind of bands. But
It's a modern rock band. That's what
well,
you
like okay, so if you're thinking back in the 90s, you know, this is way before your time, but bands like you know, the Gin Blossoms or Jeff Buckley or stuff like that. So it was more like that sort of modish rock. So not super heavy, although that's what I cut my teeth on, was really heavy music. But the band that I got in Philly wasn't really that. They were more like kind of little edgier pop kind of stuff. And they were amazing. And a friend of mine got connected with them because he worked for this record company that had signed this band. And I remember he said, "Hey, this is your chance. You need to go do this." And so I went out to Philly and I threw everything in the back of this truck, my drums, my clothes, and I just went. And it was a blast. I had a great time. But, you know, the Lord got a hold of me while I was out there. It was kind of unexpected. And I got to that point, though, where I was like, okay, am I going to do my thing or am I going to do God's thing? Because I kind of had this sense that there was something different for me, which was hard because I loved what I was doing in the band. But so I prayed this prayer at church one night. God, if you want me to do something different with my life, I'll do it, but you got to show me what it is. And within a day or two, I had a message on my answering machine from a guy who was a pastor back in Iowa who was looking for a youth pastor. And he called me and said, "Hey, I tracked you down. Have you ever thought about being a youth pastor?" I'm like,
how did he find your name?
a friend of a friend, you know, he
They're
ran
like,
into
this
him
guy's
somewhere.
cool. He's a musician. He plays in a rock band.
Well, I remember
He loves Jesus. Like what?
Yeah.
Like, were you interested in being a youth pastor at that point?
That was the furthest thing from my mind.
So it's not like you told some friend like, "Hey, I might want to be a
No.
youth pastor. Put my name in."
Absolutely not. That was the last thing I ever would have thought about doing. I didn't even go to youth group when I was a kid, and my dad was the pastor, right? I was like, that's for dorks. I'm not doing that. You know, I was like, I wasn't going to do any of that stuff. That was just not who I was. So for me to be faced with this decision of, do I follow my dream or I do what I think God's called me to do? And I was really wrestling with that, but I remember praying that prayer, and I didn't want to be a half-hearted disciple. So I just was like, okay, God, what do I do here? And I just felt like the Lord was saying, you're going to go and you're going to interview for this job. And if they offer it to you, you're going to take it. So I had a plan.
You felt like God told you that.
Yes. I felt like God told me that.
Go and try it out, you know, interview. If they give it to you, this is from me. This is for you.
That was my fleece.
Be a youth pastor.
Yeah. That was my fleece before the Lord, you know. But I had a little plan. My plan was I was going to sabotage this interview. So I go into the church and I walked in. I was probably dressed kind of like this. You know, normally you'd wear like a tie for a big job interview or whatever. I was a college dropout.
They loved you the more for it. They're like, this guy, the youth are going to love this guy.
I don't know what happened, but they asked me all these questions. They started with the question, well, Keith, tell us why you want to be our youth pastor. Now, this is a little neighborhood church of about 250 people, okay, in a medium-sized city in Iowa. So it's not like this big mega church thing, right? And why do you want to be our youth pastor? And I remember saying to them, I don't. And they were like, you don't? I'm like, nope, I really don't. And they were like, okay, next question. You know, what qualifies you to work with our students? I mean, I was basically a student myself. And I said, I have zero qualifications. I'm a college dropout. I have no experience. I have no education. I don't know anything about this. I have zero qualifications. And they were like, well, what are you doing here? And I remember telling them, I said, I'm here because I think God called me to be here.
Wow.
And this is me telling you that I said, I'm going to level with you. I don't know why I would do this, but I think God, and I told them about that night in the church. And I said, I just want to do what Jesus wants me to do. And if this is what he wants, then it's what I want. But he's got to tell you guys too.
Whoa.
And I walked out of there thinking, okay, this was a test, right? Abraham, Isaac kind of thing. You know,
How did they respond to that when you said that?
They didn't really say much.
They were just like,
I think they were shocked because, you know, they had other candidates that had the nice prim and proper answers. And it was sort of scripted, you know, this person's going to ask this person's going to ask that. And they probably thought they're going to get relatively the same answers, you know. And I don't think that they knew what to do with that. But there was something there. And they called me the next day and said, we want you to come be our youth pastor. And I was horrified because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I thought I have to do this. So I went back to Philly.
Were you sad?
I was.
Wow.
I was sad, but I was also like really at that young age trying to follow the Lord.
You know that Bible verse about the rich man who went away sad?
Yeah.
But he went away. Like Jesus said, give up everything and follow me. And he didn't want to do it, even though he was being really good and trying to follow Jesus. In one sense, he didn't want to give up everything to follow Jesus. And it was a sad thing, you know, that obviously. But you felt the sadness, but then you still obeyed. You said, yes, Lord, I'm going to leave my rock band.
That's exactly what happened.
7 Weeks Coffee is America's pro-life coffee company on a mission to fund the pro-life movement, one delicious cup of coffee at a time. And they check every box. This is pesticide-free, mold-free, organically farmed, low-acid coffee that is absolutely delicious. 7 Weeks Coffee donates 10% of every single sale, including the sale you can make today, to pro-life pregnancy centers. And because coffee always tastes better with a free gift, if you go to 7weekscoffee.com today and subscribe using the code Lila at checkout, you'll get a free 2-pack of their new travel bags to take your coffee wherever life takes you. And exclusively for the listeners of this show, you can go to 7weekscoffee.com. You can use the code Lila at checkout to get up to 25% off your first purchase as well as your free gift.
But leaving the rock band wasn't the hardest thing. Because I met this girl when I was in Philly. Okay. And it was legit like love at first sight, at least from my part. I was waiting tables because even though I was in this awesome band, we weren't making any money. So I'm working at the Olive Garden. I mean, you didn't know this.
The Olive Garden?
Yeah.
No way. I used to love the Olive Garden back in the day.
You are sitting across from the May 1993 Employee of the Month.
What an honor.
I even have the plaque.
That is, thank you.
Yeah.
That is a first for this podcast.
You know, it's I don't tell a lot of people that on podcasts, but you know, you're special. So
thank you. Well, as an Italian, I'm very, honored by your presence. Thank you for your service to Olive Garden and the breadsticks.
So I'm making the raspberry lemonade on the side stand and I look through the fake plants and I see this beautiful girl sitting at the table filling out a job application. I remember I said to my buddy, I said, I'm going to marry that girl.
Wow.
No idea who she is, but I just looked at her and it was just like, boom, all the things happened. Right. And I'm like, I'm going to marry that girl. Well, I got to know her a little bit. And I remember feeling like this girl's amazing, but I don't know if she, I want to only date Christians. Right. I was trying to do the best I could to follow God's plan in every area. So that meant I'm not going to get, hung up with crazy women out there. Right. So I'm only going to date a girl who's a Christian. So I asked her one day, are you a Christian? And she says, well, I'm Catholic. Does that count? And I said, no, because we're in the world I came from. I didn't know anything about the Catholic Church. The only thing I knew was that the biggest partiers in my school were the Catholics. And the stuff I'd heard like from my pastor and everything about Catholicism, it made it seem like it was a completely different thing than what I was doing.
Like, what are all these icons? What is this like incense? Like, it just seemed weird to you. It
totally seemed weird to me. And they, it seemed like these weren't people who really follow the Bible. Now, I didn't know that from experience. I'm just going off of what other people are telling me. I'd never been to a Catholic church. I'd never talked to somebody who was Catholic. I'd never looked into what the Catholic Church taught officially. I just had all of the caricatures in my mind of what Catholicism is. And I think a lot of Protestants understand that. They hear that and they go, yeah, I mean, I talk to people all the time now that, well, you guys worship Mary and, you believe the Pope is perfect. All of the things, that's where I was. So, and the other thing that I'd been told was that Catholics don't really understand the gospel. They have a different gospel. So I said to her, I said, well, would you be willing to come to church with me? And she said, sure. So I brought her to my church. And the first night she was there.
Calvary Chapel.
Yeah, it was a Calvary Chapel. And it's a big one. The one in Philly is huge. And she loved it. And like the first night she went down and gave her life to Jesus and was like, what do I do? And I said, she's like, what do I do about my Catholic stuff? Am I supposed to start going to mass? I said, no, that's done. You've been set free from religion. Now you've got a relationship with Jesus. So that's all tradition stuff. I mean, her parents didn't take her to mass anyway. So it wasn't like that was something she was going to have to leave behind.
So she hadn't been like going to mass on Sundays or anything,
no.
But she was like raised Catholic, kind of culturally Catholic.
Yes.
But she really felt like the first time she gave her life to Jesus was at this Calvary Chapel altar call. And then she's like, I'm on fire. Now what do I do?
You got it. So we kind of got really close really fast because I was all she had in that world. And, you know, I was like, what do I do about this? And I did tell her, well, I'm leaving. I'm going back to Iowa to be a youth pastor. And I convinced her to come with me. So,
and this as a girlfriend, or what was she at that point?
Well, she was a girlfriend. Okay. But I remember talking to our pastor out there, and I told him, I said, I feel like I'm supposed to marry this girl, you know, but we just really started connecting. I mean, it hadn't been very long. And I said, I want to bring her to Iowa with me. And he told me, he said, don't bring her there unless you plan to marry her. And I said, I really believe that's supposed to happen. But it was, you know, not much time had passed.
How long was it?
It was probably maybe a couple of months.
Okay.
You know,
my parents got engaged after, I think, like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Literally. So you're
okay. So we're good. We're good.
You're good.
You know, so
she moves to Iowa. No problem.
She moved to Iowa. She didn't move right when I moved. She moved out later, and she moved in with like we never lived together or anything like that. She moved in with a family in our church, our pastor's family. And then she got her own apartment. And, you know, then we got married. That was in like August of 95. And we got married the next year. So the next August, a year later, we were married. And this little youth group that we started with like 12 kids in this little Methodist church, I had no clue what I was doing. Within about 2 years, it had blown up to about 250, 300 kids every Wednesday night.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was
every week.
It was awesome.
Well, and you said originally the whole church was only like 200 people.
Yeah, it was like 250 people.
Whoa.
And this youth group just...
What were you doing? What was it? What did you do that engaged them so much?
You know what?
250 young people every week in this little town in Iowa.
Well, I started off doing everything the way that I thought I was supposed to do it, which was, you know, trying to just have fun with the kids and be around. And that wasn't really doing anything. It wasn't until I came up with this plan to involve the kids in youth ministry, not just youth group. Okay. And so there's a youth group mentality, which is like, hey, we're a bunch of kids getting together here.
Groupies, like
we're just like hanging out. We're all about each other's lives or whatever. And I said to them, I said, I'm not ready to give my life for this. I want to reach the city. I want to reach your schools. I want to reach your friends. So what we need to do is get a vision from God to have a ministry, because a ministry is about others. A group is about us. And I said, that's the thing we have to realize is if we're just busy looking at ourselves, we got a little holy huddle going on here. That's fine for us, but I think God wants to do something bigger than that. So we sort of turned our focus outward to the kids that weren't coming. But it's interesting. You would think that in order to attract non-church kids, you'd have to make it even more fun and do crazy stuff, which we did, but we also made it more deep. So we had like a rock band, because I took the musical stuff that I was doing, and we had our own rock band there. And this was back when that wasn't like everywhere. But we like wrote our own music. We produced our own CD of original worship music that we did. But I would preach for like an hour every Wednesday night. And it was like hardcore preaching. This wasn't the, hey, everybody, let's learn how to be nice to each other and don't do drugs and alcohol and don't have sex before you get married. I didn't even go there, because I would tell the kids, I'm like, look, if you think that just that's what this is all about, we're not doing that, because the last thing I want to do is have a bunch of well-behaved kids headed for hell. I want you guys to be on fire for Jesus. I want you guys to have your life radically transformed by God. And then those things will come into play. But we're not going to start with the fruit. We're going to start with the seed. And that's what we did. And it just took off. And kids got a vision for inviting their friends and inviting this. And then pretty soon, guess what happened? Their parents started coming. And most of these kids were Catholics. Okay.
Whoa.
So they were coming over after CCD class on Wednesday night from the Catholic Church. And they were like, and then they pretty much stopped going to CCD because they wanted to be with us. And then their parents were like, what's going on down there? So they would come over. Well, then we started a worship service on Sunday morning just for their parents. And that was the biggest worship service that we had. Meaning
then the Catholic parents would go to mass afterwards, or what would that? No, they just were defecting.
They were defecting. Yeah. I like the way you put that. But that's exactly what happened. And we would sit in our office, me and our senior pastor, Pastor Craig, and I would sit there, and we would meet with all these families that are new to the church, just pouring in every week. And they would tell us, this is amazing. We've never heard this. It was like the same story I heard from my wife. Never heard this before. You know, how do we sign up? What do we do? And we made it really easy for people just to come and be a part of our church. And that's what they did. So my experience was, it was really easy to get nominal Catholics to just drop all that and come over to our church because it was like the fun church, but it was also the serious church at the same time. So that's what we were doing.
So, obviously I'm skipping ahead here because you would end up, you're pastoring, you're doing ministry, it's growing, it's being fruitful. Then you're on this journey, and then you ended up becoming Catholic down the line, which I want to hear you share about that. But I got to ask, like, looking back now, what do you think about what the Holy Spirit was doing then? Because it sounds like there was some real fruit that was coming from your ministry, but if they're leaving, the church, the Catholic Church, right? Yeah. Now it sounds like maybe they were going to the Catholic Church and didn't even understand what they were doing. Maybe they were just raised that way. But how do you see that chapter in your life and like God's story, working in your life at that time?
It kind of depends on the day. Some days I look back on that and I think, wow, that was amazing. Other days I look back on it and I think, what was I doing? I know there was some good that came from it, but I remember like years later, there was some fallout there, and it wasn't always awesome.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, like there were kids that would get excited for their faith and then they would just drop off the face of the earth. There were people that would join our church all excited. And then because we trained them that this is what church is like, right? Well, eventually, no matter what you do, if you're coming to church because it's exciting and fun and all of those things, eventually it wears off. And then there's another church that starts down the street or across the river that does it bigger and better. So then what we started seeing was there was like this revolving door of people that would come into our church, get really excited, fired up for, a period of time, and then they would just skip out the back.
Like it's sort of like the Holy Spirit high.
Yeah, exactly. And I was, at the time, I thought that's just what I'm here for.
Give them the high, like help be,
yes,
help bring the Holy Spirit, make his presence felt known to people here and now. They can have a radical change, fall in love with Jesus. But then the next question is like sustaining that change over time, over years and years and years was the next step.
Exactly. And I felt like as I was there for 13 years, okay, long enough to see like a generation of kids cycle out of my ministry. And I saw so many kids that were like pillars in that ministry completely lose their faith altogether. And
why? Did you notice a theme of why they'd be losing their faith?
Yeah, it was, well, we got away from this. And once we didn't have this anymore, there wasn't really anything that was exciting or whatever got out of the world. I mean, it was a variety of reasons, but.
Do you think, so it's almost like once we were away from Keith, like Keith was like our, cheerleader. He was like galvanizing this and this like exciting movement we were part of. Once we were like moved away, went to college, got married, started our own family. It's like, we couldn't find that same experience. And so like that must not be real anymore. So that would lead them to you think I'm getting at it?
I guarantee you there are kids that had that exact thing happen. And there are other kids that went on to do different things. But I just remember for me, we got to a point where, the number started to dip. They started to go down. And I remember I didn't know how to process that. I was like, what's going on? Because my whole identity was wrapped up in being that guy. My whole identity was wrapped up in being the rock star youth pastor that could snap his fingers and, hundreds of kids would do whatever I told them to do or would give their life to Jesus because I could preach some, message. Every week we had people coming in going, what's the secret sauce here? What are you doing? But it was never enough. And this was the thing that was going on in my heart was that no matter what I was able to do in that world, it was never enough for me. Because it was like a drug. It was like, I got to just keep getting the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I remember I used to think, well, when we have 100 kids coming here, that'll feel really good. And then we quickly passed that. And then it was, 150. And what I realized was that in and of itself had become this weird idol in my life of, okay, I have to be the guy. And I have to be this figure, this cult of personality that is drawing all these people to the Lord. And when that started to fade away, I just completely had a meltdown, and I didn't know how to process that.
WeHeartNutrition.com is a vitamin and supplement company that provides the highest quality, research-backed ingredients, customized and optimized to help you be healthy. What I also love about We Heart Nutrition is that this is a family-owned company, and they donate a full 10% back of all of their revenue to pregnancy resource centers to help moms and babies in need. So whether you are premenopausal or postmenopausal, whether you're looking to conceive, help improve your fertility, whether you're pregnant, and this is a great prenatal vitamin, or you're postnatal. Plus, I'm very excited to share this with my husband. Now We Heart Nutrition has come out with their first line of men's vitamins. And if you order today at weheartnutrition.com, get your vitamins, you can get 20% off using the code Lila. And if you spend at least $50, you will get a free signature bamboo capsule vitamin box. So go to weheartnutrition.com today, use the code Lila at checkout to get 20% off your purchase. That's weheartnutrition.com. How long into the ministry did that meltdown start? Like, how long had you been ministering at that point?
You know, I don't feel like it was a switch that flipped. I would say almost as fast as it got really successful, that started to happen, because that was the thing that was going on in my heart. I was, and maybe you can relate to this when you were growing up, you know, my heroes were the big pastors and the big megachurch pastors, you know, the Rick Warrens and the Bill Hybels and all these guys. We used to come out to Saddleback Church and see all these big things, and we'd go to these big conferences and we'd go to these youth things, and I would see these guys that had thousands of kids coming, and they were my heroes. And I wanted to be like them. I put my faith in them, and I was like, I got to be like these guys. And I think as soon as I got to that point where people started to look up to me a little bit, you know, I think that's when that started to happen to me. But it really came to a head when I would say, you know, maybe 8 or 9 years into it, it would start. Because the other thing that happened in the middle of that was I had a family. You know, we had 3 kids, and my wife and I, we have a daughter and 2 sons. And I really struggled, and that's being kind to myself to say it that way, with being a good dad and a good husband, because I was so committed to this ministry, to all of these things, that it was almost as if my family was sort of in the way sometimes. And I know they felt that way at times. You know, my kids were little. They probably wouldn't think of it that way, but I know my wife did. And it was really, really hard, you know, and there was a lot of struggles in life and in marriage in that time. And it got to a point where I had to step away from all of that, because I had just a major identity crisis going on. And I had to just be like, I can't do this anymore. Now, the other thing that's parallel to this in a way was I had this friend that I met while I was doing this ministry stuff that was Catholic. He was a graphic designer, and I needed to hire a graphic designer to make a logo for our youth group, because we couldn't just be, hey, youth group. We had to be something cool. So we had a branding, we had all that. And this is back like when that was like really not the normal thing. You couldn't just go onto the internet and make a logo. We had that, and it was super cool. But the guy that did that, when I met him, I went over to his house to look at some of his work. He was about my age. And as soon as I met him, I'm like, oh, we just connected. And when I went into his house, he had all this Catholic stuff everywhere. Statues, he had icons and everything.
Rosaries.
Everything. The little bowl of water, you know, and I remember thinking to myself, what is going on here?
Like, am I supposed to drink this? And no, that's holy water.
I had no clue what to do.
Bless yourself. That is so funny.
And so we start talking, and I remember I think, well, I need to get this guy in my church. So I start evangelizing this guy, and I'm like, do you know Jesus? Do you know? But instead of being like every other Catholic guy I talked to that was like, what are you talking about? He was like, absolutely, I know Jesus. And I'm like, all right, are you born again Christian? Absolutely, I'm a born again Christian, you know? And he shared his own personal testimony with me, which was big for us. That's what we did. That's how we connected with people, was telling me about how you came to know the Lord. And he had an answer. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, but you're Catholic. I didn't think Catholics did that. And he was just like, oh man, you know, let me share some stuff with you. And that relationship opened the door to all of the Catholic things. And I remember he started putting the screws to me a little bit about things, you know, okay, Mr. Bible guy, let's talk about John 6, or let's talk about that. And I had never had a Catholic ever challenge me before with stuff from the Bible, anything like that. And I didn't know how to answer any of that. I didn't know what to do. So I was going to seminary at this time. So I did go back to school. I did go back to college, but I would go up, like we would have these discussions about the faith, and I would take what he's telling me to my seminary professors and say, all right, how do I beat this guy? how do I convince this Catholic to become Protestant? And they had zero answers.
Zero.
Well, in terms of effective, I remember, I'll give you one example. I asked one of my Bible professors about Matthew 16, Matthew 16:18, where Jesus gives Peter the keys and says, upon this rock, I will build my church, the foundation of the papacy.
What does it mean?
And that's what I asked her. I said, hey, my Catholic friend is telling me this is about the papacy, but we believe that this is about Peter's faith, right? The faith in the declaration is the rock, not Peter himself, right? But the stuff that he's showing me from the church fathers and all this Catholic apologetic stuff, it's making me question what I think, because it looks pretty obvious what they're saying. So how do I answer this? And I remember this woman who is our professor, brilliant woman. She said, well, we believe that it's Peter's faith. I said, I know, but why? And her answer was, well, because we're Protestants. If we didn't believe that, we'd have to be Catholic. And I was like, what? So anyway, I had all of these types of experiences. And it kind of came to a head one night where we were at a church camp, and we were running our own church camp with all these kids there. And my friend, who was a pastor, was doing the Eucharistic liturgy, but we didn't call it that, of course. And
what did you call it?
We just called it communion.
Communion, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he got to the part and he goes, Jesus took bread, he gave it to his disciples, and he said, take this. This represents my body given for you. Now, the truth is, our official liturgy, which we never stuck to, doesn't say this represents, but that's what people just sort of riffed on that and did whatever. And when he said that, it was like all the oxygen just left the room. And I felt like the Lord speaking to me going, that's not what I said. And I was just like so convicted by that. Now,
what did he say?
He said, this is my body, not this represents my body. And that was the key, right? Was understanding what is really going on here. And in our view, it was just symbolic. It wasn't really the real presence of Jesus. And that was something that when I heard the Catholics talk about, seemed really strange to me at first. Like, you didn't really believe that, do you? But my buddy would say, well, I thought you were like, believe the Bible, Keith. I thought you were Mr. Bible literal man. Let's look at what it says here. This is my body. My flesh is food indeed. My blood is drink indeed. And I just came face to face with this conviction. But what was I going to do with that? I remember I left that room. I went outside. We were at this lodge. I went down front. I just broke down. And I called my buddy. I said, I think I'm supposed to become Catholic. And I thought he was going to like freak out at me, be like, ha ha, because we'd been arguing for years.
Got you.
Exactly. And he said, well, I'm here to help you if I can, but here's what happened. By the time I left from talking to him to getting back up, I completely was faced with the reality of what would that actually cost me.
Well, what did that analysis look like in your mind? What it would cost you? Because you're a pastor. Was it still a Methodist church?
Yeah, I was still in my original church. So I was still running this youth ministry, right? But there was other things in my future with ministry besides just being the youth pastor, but I loved it. But you see, my wife had been asking me, what are you doing with all this Catholic stuff? Why are you talking to this guy's name's Devin? Why are you talking to Devin about all the Catholic? Like, you're not going to become Catholic, are you? And I remember saying to her, hey, there is no way in the world I could ever become Catholic. I'm the last guy that would ever be able to be in a Catholic church. No way. He's going to become a Protestant. Because she kind of had this look in her eye like,
because that was what she was kind of raised with, right? And you were the one who flipped her and was like, hey,
exactly,
come to know Jesus. And it sounds like she did have that first sort of very personal experience with Jesus through the Calvary Chapel
100%.
Church. Yeah.
So I had, I'm the guy who's in control of everything. I'm the guy who's like, no, don't worry. It's fine. Cause I didn't want her to be a freak about anything or freak out at me. So when I walk in this room, all these kids are worshiping God. My kids are in there. My kids were little. My wife and that is this voice in my head. You're going to blow up all of this? Are you going to tell her that you're done? Cause you can't do that. You're going to quit. What about all these kids? You're their spiritual leader. What about your family? What are you going to do for a job? You don't know how to do anything else. Like, this is what you're here for. And I remember just being like, you asked me earlier, what did like the rich young ruler who went away sad? That's the moment that I went away sad because I was like, I can't do this. And I shut everything down, like with Catholicism. I said, I can't be thinking about this anymore. I can't be reading this stuff anymore. I can't be talking to my Catholic friends anymore. I can't do any of this. I have to just forget about it. And I ran the other way as far as I possibly could. And I thought that's just a distraction. I've got to get back to what I'm supposed to be doing here. But it led to a very, very dark time. And because I went away sad that day, because I felt like I wanted to be Catholic. I felt like it was the truth, but I didn't feel like I could do it. So I said no. And that just made everything worse. And then eventually I stepped away from ministry. I had to get things right with my family. I had to get things right in my marriage. I had to get things right in my heart. And I just needed to be done with that.
EveryLife.com is America's pro-life baby diaper and wipes company. I love EveryLife.com, and I use EveryLife diapers and wipes for my little ones because these are a best-in-class product that are clean. There's no harmful dyes or fragrances or phthalates in this product. It is designed to be healthy for your little one and good for your little one's skin. If you go to EveryLife.com/join today, by joining the Changing Lives Club, you not only get 10% off your monthly diaper and wipes subscription, in addition to that, you'll get a free tote bag, and EveryLife.com will donate a box of diapers and wipes to a mother and baby in need. And I'm excited to share, EveryLife.com is now offering training pants for your little one. These are 12-hour leak-proof training pants, pull-ups for that little one that is maybe potty training. You got to check them out. EveryLife also has just come out with their new shampoo and baby wash and lotion package. The product is amazing. I have already started to use it. That's EveryLife.com/join. Use the code Lila. Did that look like, if I can ask, like you were doubling down on the ministry? Because this felt like the original calling from God, like the original plan, like God, what do you want to do with me? And then you end up connecting with this youth ministry. You're seeing this fruit. Things are kind of rough. You're figuring it out. This Catholic thing starts looming. And did you, when you said that things were really tough, was that because you had trouble properly prioritizing everything you were doing? Because in some ways, God's grace, not that he didn't have grace for you, but like you weren't living in your calling. So it's like things were not aligning the way that they should. Do you think that's part of it?
100%. I was, see, here's the thing that can happen sometimes to people in ministry when they're good at it. And I think this is true whether you're Catholic, Protestant, whatever. If you're good at something, that sort of becomes your identity. And you start to have this weird idea that the reason why God loves me is because of the things I can do, because of the things I can do for him. And you can get this weird identity crisis where you feel like I, as Keith, don't really matter to God, just as a man. The only thing that makes me valuable to God is the stuff I can do in this ministry world, because all these people are telling you how great you are all the time. But yet in your own heart, you feel far from God. You feel like, no, I'm an imposter. You feel like I'm not really living for him. So like, I had this crisis where I was like, no, I'm done with this. And I had realized that I was destroying my family. I was destroying my own faith. I was destroying all of these things. And it really took the Lord, I believe, in his grace, taking away the thing that had become my idol, which was my rock star youth ministry status. And I had no answers. I was like, I don't know what to do here. So, I mean, it was a couple of years of that. And we left the church world. We did some other stuff. We actually moved out to a boys ranch where we worked in ministry with like a family that took care of troubled kids. Did you resign, by the way, from your church?
Yeah. Okay. And then you're just trying other things. I mean, you got to support your family.
Yeah.
I think that is a catch-22 for a lot of people in ministry, is that if they're supporting their family this way, but then they feel God calling them a different place, right?
Yeah.
Then it can be really tough when this is your livelihood. And, ministries, there's certain things that are similar, but they're also very unique. I'm sure what you were doing is very unique. It sounds like it was incredibly unique at that youth chapter in the, group in the Methodist Church. So when you were trying all these new things, what were you thinking about the Catholicism stuff? Were you thinking about that? Or you're just like, let's deal with that later?
It was still gone. I was still like running from that, but I had adequately shut that off.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't creep back in for a couple of more years. So we were at this boys ranch for a while and getting things figured out, getting things worked out, basically stripped me down to nothing. And then, slowly but surely people started inviting me to come back and speak and do different things in churches. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And I took a couple of part-time ministry jobs in various churches. We left the boys ranch after a little over a year being out there. And I was working, as a part-time preacher at this one church and a part-time preacher at a different church. So there was a period of time when I was serving 2 different churches in 2 different towns and 2 different denominations at the same time. But they were small and there wasn't all this pressure to like grow and be this huge thing, which is exactly what I needed. And we lived in that world for a couple of years. And even though it wasn't glamorous and it wasn't lucrative and this wasn't going to be anything major. And I remember going into one of the churches that had 30 people in it. And I came in and they were like, we can only afford to pay you, a couple of $100 a week to just come down here and preach. And I said, look, here's what I can do. I can come down here. I can preach. I'll sleep on the sofa in the office. I can give you 1 day a week and I'll preach on Sundays. We're not going to have some big program. We're not going to do all this crazy stuff. I'm going to teach you the Bible and we're going to be nice to each other. That was our philosophy of ministry. And that little church blew up. It was awesome. Like it grew from like 30 people to like 120 people.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. You're clearly
in like less than a year.
You're clearly incredibly gifted at communication and, you've got this passion, you've got this gift. So you're giving them that gift, right? You're using that gift. You're talking about, the faith, how to get closer to God, our Lord, all of this. During that time, were you kind of feeling a sense of revival, like separate from the Catholic stuff over there? Yeah. Like, oh, I'm back at it. Like, the youth group scene maybe wasn't my scene. Maybe I'm supposed to be like the lead pastor of a church. Like, where was your head at that time?
I was kind of cautiously doing that, but the most important thing to me was that I didn't repeat that same mistake of trying to make myself into some big thing. So I just said, look, we're not going to have big dreams and goals here. We're going to be about what we're supposed to be about. And for me, the number one thing was my family. And so I was very protective of my family. And I was like, I'm not doing anything that's going to get in the way of my family. That was the most important thing to me because I felt like that I didn't take it for granted. So that was what I was trying to do. But at the same time, we were barely making it financially. But we were okay. We were just scraping by. And then one of my other friends who pastors a pretty large church in the Methodist church, he basically was like, hey man, I ran into him at a funeral and he was like, what are you doing? You fell off the face of the earth for, a few years. What are you up to? And I kind of told him and he said, would you come here? We need somebody like you to be here. And I said, well, what is the job? And he's like, you're basically going to be my right-hand man. You're going to be in charge of youth, mission, worship, all this stuff. And immediately I was like, nope, not doing that. They're getting ready to build a big, $10 million building. This was a big happening church. And my thing was, nope, I'm not doing that because I don't want to get sucked back in. I didn't trust myself. I'm like, no, what happens if I get back into that world and I start repeating those same mistakes? So we did interview for the job. And I told them no. They offered it to me like the next day. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And then it was like the Holy Spirit was just like, no, Keith, you need to go do this. And so we took this job, which moved our family into this new city. So I started working at this big Methodist church and I loved it. It was a much more healthy situation for me. There wasn't the same type of focus on trying to grow some giant thing. And in some ways that probably hamstrung a few things at the church because I was just like, nope, not doing that. Nope, not doing before I never said no to anything. Now I'm saying no to everything. I'm like, nope, not doing that. My wife at the time had started her own photography studio. She's an incredible portrait photographer and she'd started her own photography business. I was helping her with that. So I told the church, look, I'm helping my wife with the business too. So you have to let me have time. And they're like, yeah, it's fine. So we were working on that together and things were going pretty good. And our church was doing okay, but our denomination was starting to really crumble. And I don't know if you've seen all the stuff that happened with the Methodist church, but a lot of the liberal mainline churches have kind of fallen apart, in the recent past. And the Methodist church was going through this really nasty infighting. And I was still the Bible guy. You know, I still wanted to be all about Jesus. So when I'm seeing all these things happening in our denomination, all these alarm bells are going off. And I'm like, I can't, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing this. So I'm preaching these fiery sermons on Sunday to the adults. I'm speaking to these kids.
And was this stuff about like marriage,
yes,
sex?
Yes.
I mean, these moral issues having to do with.
Well, you name it. I mean, it was, are we going to do same-sex marriages in the church? Are we going to ordain practicing homosexuals? You know, the pro-life thing was kind of mixed into that. It wasn't really ever like at the center of it, but you could tell it was weird. It was like the people that were for all those things were also pro-choice. And I remember, like, for me, that was always a non-negotiable, you know, like, no, I'm not going to hear any of your reasons. I'm not going to hear, you know, we are 100% pro-life no matter what. And there's no scenario where in my mind we make exception for that. But some of the other people were like, well, what about this? What about that? And so I'm kind of struggling with what's happening in my denominational world. And at the same time, like, it was really weird how this all happened. But the Catholic stuff started to rear its head in my mind because of the conversations I was having with some of the other pastors that were arguing that the church should go in a more liberal direction. Because I'm saying to them, but the Bible says this, the Bible says that. And they're like, well, that's just your interpretation of the Bible. We've got our scholars and they say this is okay. And I'm like, well, okay, I can't argue from the Bible alone. So now I got to argue from church tradition. Well, the church has always taught this.
Meaning for how to think about what the Bible is saying.
Yes.
Because I think, a lot of people say, well, just do what the Bible says. And it's like, you know, I've also talked with some very, you know, left-leaning Christians who think abortion in some circumstances is okay, who thinks, you know, like you said, homosexuality in practice, not just a temptation, but like a lifestyle is acceptable if you're, you know, transgenderism, whatever. And there's a way to, now another person might be like, well, but it's clearly objectively, you know, they're clearly objectively using scripture the wrong way.
Yeah.
So like, using just reason separate from Catholic church tradition, whatever, like just using your pure reason, you can tell what's scriptural and not. I mean, I don't know if you,
absolutely,
what you think about that. Yeah.
I mean, we had like some of our leading Methodist pastors with some of the largest churches had publicly changed their stance from being on the more conservative side to being more liberal. So that was sort of the thing. Now it's like, oh my goodness, this movement's going to, even though it kept getting defeated at all the denominational meetings, the margin was growing smaller and smaller. And I was like getting really uncomfortable, you know, but these conversations, okay, church tradition, right? This is the way the church has always done. To which they would say to me, well, which church are you talking about? Our church is only 40 years old, you know, and we're not bound to any church tradition. So then I had to go, okay, well, what else is there? Well, then there's the authority. Well, who gets to say what's okay and what's not okay, what's biblical, what's not biblical? And that led someone to say to me, well, if you believe in all this church authority stuff, why aren't you Catholic? And that just sort of, you know, made me realize, whoa, I've been arguing like a Catholic with these people. And right around that time, one of my Catholic friends, I had two Catholic friends at the time that had sort of hung with me. You know, we weren't always super in touch, but had come to see me and we had some conversations and I told him I was struggling with where I was. And he just said, maybe you should go talk to a priest. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do that. And he gave me the name of a priest. And I remember when I went to go meet with him, we were going to have lunch after daily mass. So I went to the daily mass. I hadn't been to a Catholic church in years. I'd been to a mass in years. And when the deacon came walking in with the gospel during the processional, you know, they hold the book up like that. That just hit me. Because it was as if they were saying, this is our book. This is important here. Because the thing that I was so struggling with was, it's got to be the Bible. It's got to be the Bible. And it was like the Catholics were saying, this is our book,
It's
Keith.
all about the Bible.
And and it just hit me. And then
liturgy of the word.
Exactly. And it was like I could see that. And then by this time, this is like 2015, Catholic YouTube is now a thing. So I'm diving into all of these things. I met with this priest. He was amazing. And I'm starting to just feel more and more drawn to all of this Catholic stuff. At this time, though, I'm very open with my wife about it. and I'm sharing with her kind of how I'm feeling about it. And she's right there with me on the problems with the Methodist Church, but she's not right there with me on the Catholic stuff. She's like, I don't know what to do with this, but it was clear that I was being drawn more in that direction. And the more I started to go down that direction, the more I felt led there. And all of the objections that I had always had about Mary or the saints or all of the things, most of those had been resolved, but they were now just boom, boom, boom. And I got to a point where I really wanted to be Catholic, but I didn't know, once again, the same issue, whether or not I could actually do it. It all came to a head one particular day. I woke up, and I mean, I had a bunch of stuff happen that if people want to see, they can see it on my YouTube channel. There's a lot more about this on there, but I woke up in the morning, I was praying, and I had the day off, which was very rare. I was going to have dinner that night with one of my Catholic friends. And I woke up and I was praying. I was just like, Lord, you know, what's going on here? And the name Steve Ray just keeps popping into my head. And Steve is like this Baptist guy that became Catholic. He's got a bunch of videos on YouTube. I had seen one of his videos, but I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know him, but I just kept hearing Steve Ray, Steve Ray, Steve Ray. It was just like in my brain all day long. So I go to meet my Catholic buddy. His name's Greg. I go to meet Greg at this restaurant, and before he even,
kind of food?
It was burgers. We go to have this burger place in Iowa City, which is like halfway between where he lives and where I live. Before he sits down, his phone goes off, and it's his wife. And he's like, this is a text for you. I said, well, okay, what does it say? Tell Keith Steve Ray is in town tonight, and you guys need to go.
Whoa.
And I just flipped out. I'm like, we have to do that. And he's like, who's Steve Ray? And I'm like, oh, yeah. You know, I told him, and we ate real fast, and we drove to Silvis, Illinois, Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish, which is about a 45-minute ride from where we were. And I'm just like, what is going on? We go into the church. They're having mass, and the church is packed. And I'm just like a total wreck. I'd called my other Catholic buddy, Devin, said, meet us over here. He's like, why? Just get over there. I go up to get my blessing, and I take a step to the right. And this is one of those churches where the crucifix is like literally hanging right above the altar. So I just knelt down right there. I just fell on my knees. People are taking the Eucharist, stepping over me. And I'm looking up at the crucifix, and I'm just crying out to Jesus. And I remember saying to him, if you want me to become Catholic, I will do it. But you've got to make a way. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's supposed to happen. You know, I told my dad that I was thinking about doing this, and I remember him saying to me, there has to be a way, Keith. You can't just quit your job and become Catholic. Like, what's the way? Like, what's the plan here? Because I was very much like, okay, everything's got to be, you know, the way I want it or whatever. At least I have to know the plan. Mm-hmm. What's the way? And like from the crucifix, he spoke to me, and he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You don't need me to make a way. You just need me. And I just lost it, because I realized that all of the things I was hanging on to that kept me sad, like the guy, the rich young ruler, he was sad because he knew that what Jesus was offering him was valuable, but the stuff that he was holding on to in his mind was more valuable. And I realized that I was doing the same thing. I want all this Catholic stuff. I believe it's the truth. I think it's amazing, but my job, my security, my ministry, you name it. And I just let it go. And I realized that if I lost everything, but I got Jesus, I win. If I lost it all, but I got him in the Eucharist, and it was specifically related to the Eucharist, because that's what was happening right in front of me. And I recognized that that was worth everything. Steve gave a talk that night about how the early Christians were willing to go to their death before they would pinch incense to the Roman gods or the pagan gods, and they would be killed. And I was just like, that's it. I got to do this. So on the way home, I told my friends, I'm doing this. I got home. I told Stell, I said, look, I have to become Catholic. I don't know any of the answers to the questions that you have. What are we going to do for a job? What about this? What about that? How's this going to go down? What about our kids? What about all of those things? I don't know. But this I know. I have to do this. I should have done it a dozen years ago. Would have saved us all a lot of heartache if I had done that. But I've been given another chance. And I remember Steve said to me that night, because my friend Greg took me up. He's like, you got to talk to Steve. And so Steve grabs him and he says, or Greg grabs Steve. He says, this is my friend Keith. He's a Protestant pastor. He's thinking about becoming Catholic. And Steve looks at me and he goes, I'm just going to give you one piece of advice. you either need to become Catholic right now or turn around and run away and never look back. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I already did that once. And when I got home, I told my wife, I said, I have to do this. And then I sort of braced for whatever was going to happen. And she said to me, Keith, I'm so proud of you.
Wow.
I have seen you struggle with this for years. I know that you want to do whatever God wants you to do. I know how much your ministry means to you. I know how much your career means to you. And if this is something that you believe that strongly, that God's calling you to do it, then I'm with you. I'm with you. And I just, at that moment, I was like, okay, we're going to be okay. Because I didn't want to mess up my family, you know? And I feel like the Lord just gave me that grace. And that doesn't mean that she was like, yay, Catholic, because she wasn't. But she was with me. So I went in the next day and I began that process of extracting myself from my career, my job, and becoming Catholic. And my last Sunday there at the church that I loved was the Sunday that we put shovels in the ground to break ground on the new $10 million building that I had helped raise the money for. And, I was supposed to take over the whole thing, and I literally went from the newest church in town, which was literally a hole in the ground, to the next week I was at the oldest church in town, which was the Catholic church. And when I finally came into the church, this was in the spring. We didn't do RCIA. My priest was like, no, we're not going to do that with you. We'll just meet and talk. And I remember saying to him, hey, when do I get to become Catholic? And he goes, well, you tell me. I think you're ready. So we just picked this random date on the calendar, October 8th. So that day arrives. I go up to get my sacraments and we got our marriage done in the church. I mean, we did all the things we needed to do. I received the Eucharist, made my confirmation, went back to my spot in the front row. And then it was time to do the passing of the peace, right? The sharing of the peace. I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turn around. Steve Ray's standing there. He was in town,
wow,
giving a talk at another church, and just happened to be at that church. We have tons of masses at our church.
He didn't even know you were getting confirmed that day.
No, he had no idea who I was.
Wow.
He had no idea who I was. He just saw, some guy's becoming Catholic. He runs up, taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around and I see him there, and I looked at him and I'm like, and he says, welcome home, brother. You'll never look back. And I had remembered what he had said to me before. He had no memory of that. I've talked to Steve plenty of times since then.
Interesting.
And he still is like, oh yeah, sure. But I don't think he put two and two together, but the Lord made that happen. So that was October 8th, 2017. And that's how I became Catholic.
And now you're doing Catholic ministry. I mean, it's like, Protestant pastor, they're obviously shepherding a church is a core part of that. They're preaching, they're teaching. And then there's a lot of people who are just, out there kind of Catholic influencers or Protestant influencers. But how has ministry changed for you since, leaving the Methodist church and the Protestant church and now becoming Catholic?
Well, the first thing that I want everybody to understand is this wasn't something I decided to do. My priest told me, he said, Keith, people are going to want you to do stuff because you were a pastor and now you're becoming Catholic. He says, don't do anything for a year. Just be Catholic. Come to church, keep your head down.
How did you pay your bills?
I went into photography with my wife. So we had this photography business and I just kind of rolled into that. So we did weddings, senior photos, families, headshots, sports stuff. Like I loved that. That was like kind of my other passion. But I had to get another job on top of that as like a traveling consultant to other photographers that was working for another company. So I was working a full-time job on the road. I was running our business with my wife and just going to mass. And I was the happiest I'd ever been in my life, Lila. I didn't care about being in ministry. I didn't care about anybody knowing who I was. I didn't care about any people would say, oh, do you miss being a pastor? I'd run into people from my old church. They'd still call me Pastor Keith, and I'd be like, nope. I just love being Catholic. It's the greatest adventure of a lifetime. And to me, like at the end of that long journey, to get to be in the church, to get to be a Catholic, that's where I realized that this is what it meant for me to follow him, to give all you have away, to take the analogy I like to use is the parable where he says the guy sold everything he had to buy the field with the treasure in it. You have to do that. And I got the field with the treasure in it. And then I started digging and I got a little dirty, but now I get to like look at this treasure. And every day it was like I was sorting through it going, oh, the rosary, that's pretty cool. Oh, this saint, that saint. Every time I turned around, there was some new treasure I was exploring and discovering being a Catholic. And that was the happiest I'd ever been in my life up to that point. I felt more fulfilled in that space doing absolutely nothing with ministry than I ever did back in the day. Because what I was learning and what I was realizing was that my relationship with God had nothing to do with all the stuff I thought I was doing for God. Because God doesn't need us to do anything for him. He's God. What he wants are people that he can do things through. And that's about your identity and your relationship with him. And if we get that wrong, it doesn't matter how great we are in the eyes of the world. Jesus says you could gain the whole world and lose your soul. You can do that in ministry. You can do that in the church. It happens all the time. And I felt so thankful to have like this second chance just with God. I didn't care about ministry stuff or any of that. But meanwhile, my wife is just like, she would say things to me. She would be like, what are you going to do? I don't feel like God's done with you yet. I feel like you're supposed to do something. And I'm just like, nope. La, 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 la. I don't want to hear that. I'm just Catholic. That's what I'm doing. And she's like, yeah, but I just think there's more, there's just more. And a year after we came into the church, we went on a pilgrimage. And
where to?
We went over to Medjugorje.
Wow.
Which I had been there as a Protestant, years earlier.
Did?
Yeah.
Whoa.
So that was part of the story I didn't really get into because I didn't want to take too much time. But my Catholic buddies drugged me over on a pilgrimage to Rome and Medjugorje when I was still very anti-Catholic.
Did you think it was weird when you went as a Protestant?
I thought it was weird, but I thought it was beautiful at the same time.
Beautiful, weird. Weird, beautiful.
Yeah. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Very mysterious. And you're like, what's going on here?
Yeah. It really had a big impact on me.
Yep.
But when we went back as a Catholic, now it's like, whoa,
just beautiful.
It was amazing. And the first day that we were there was my 1-year anniversary of being a Catholic. And the last night we were there, my wife, who had struggled for that entire year because our kids didn't really know what to do with this. They were teenagers. They were like 15, 17 and 18 and they were just lost. They didn't, I talked to my wife about it, but I didn't really do a very good job talking to my kids about it. And they were like, what are we doing? We don't like this. Can we go back to our old church, Yeah,
it was their entire community, right?
It was.
It was their whole world.
And we said, yes, you can. You don't have to do this. But now our family's divided.
Yes.
And we go to mass on Sunday morning, me and my wife, and my kids are going back to the Methodist church. And my wife would just bawl. She would just sit in church and cry. And she's just like, I don't understand why this doesn't feel right. And she had her own issues with that. And over the year, though, the Lord started to soften her heart toward it. But the last night that we were in Medjugorje, she had an experience where she felt like God was calling her to go to confession, which she did not want to do, but she did. And in that confessional, like the priest read her soul. And when she walked out of that confessional, she was a new person. I'd never seen anything like it before. All of her walls were gone. All of her apprehension about being Catholic was done, and she was on fire. And one of the things the priest told her was, you're here because you're waiting to see what's next in your life and you don't know what to do. God is about to reveal that to you. Just keep doing what you're doing. Trust. And that was enough for her to feel like it was going to be okay. The very next day, we're on the bus headed towards Split to get ready to catch the flight. And like out of nowhere, we're praying the rosary on the bus. And I get this just smack upside my head from God. I pull out my phone. I start typing on the notes. She's looking at me like, what are you doing? We're praying. And I showed her the note on my phone. I still have it on my phone to this day. And I said, this is the book I have to write. And it said The Convert's Guide to Catholicism, because it had been 1 year for me. Mm. And I thought to myself, there's not a book like this out there. There's a lot of books about why you should be Catholic or things about Catholicism, but I'd never seen a book that tells you what it feels like to be a new Catholic. That answers some of the questions that as a Protestant, you're going to walk into. Things like, how do you tell your friends that you're becoming Catholic? How do you church shop as a Catholic? It's a completely different experience. Some of the cultural things. What are the things that the Catholics say that mean different things than Protestant land? You probably went through the same exact thing when you came into the church. And so I just went back and started working on this book in my little spare time I had. And in the middle of that, the year had been up. My priest came to me and said, "Hey, Keith, the year's up. I think it's time for you to share your story with our church." And I thought, okay, that's fine. I mean, I'll do whatever that man tells me to do, like to this day. So I showed up one night to my parish and the place was packed. I couldn't believe it. And I just gave my journey, and they recorded it on video and sent me the file like a few weeks later. And I didn't know what to do with it. So I just made a YouTube channel and I just literally parked it on YouTube. And then by that time I had another one that I had done for some friends, just a small little event. So I had these 2 videos, and I mean, it's so interesting now where things are, but I didn't make a thumbnail, and the description the title literally just said Protestant becomes Catholic. That was it. There wasn't even a description. I didn't do anything. And it seemed like out of nowhere, people start contacting me.
The algo loved it.
The algorithm loved it. It was the high time of that. It was like 2019. And people like would come into my photography studio to talk to me.
Wow. That
had seen the video, and I'm like, what? And so by then people start asking me to come and give little missions and different talks. And so then my wife says, "Hey, maybe we should make other videos." So we'd come home from mass after church, and we just go, okay. She'd just point the camera at me and say, "What do you want to talk about?" I'm like, "I don't know. Let's just talk about, maybe something that I had to struggle with about the Virgin Mary. 3 things that tripped me up about the Virgin Mary and how I got over them." And then make a video. And then that's what really began everything. And then,
wow.
Here we are 6 years later, 5.5 years
millions
later.
Of people have watched your videos now.
I'm the most surprised person of that's happening right now, and believe it.
I'm not surprised that God has used you in
I appreciate
that. Welcome to the church, obviously.
Thank you.
And I say this carefully because, like, we know our Protestant brothers and sisters, like, they are, it's the same God that they serve. We all serve the same God.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you, because I think I see this theme often, like so many people who are not Catholic, but they're Christian. And we talk about faith. And when sort of the misconceptions maybe about like praying to the saints or Mary or purgatory start to kind of dissolve a little bit, like they kind of start to see, oh, maybe this does make sense here. And, oh, I didn't realize that this was scriptural, whatever it is, right? But then I see like there's a community that they're usually plugged into, their church community. There is, for pastors, this is their career. This is how they pay their bills. This is how they felt God was calling them, what God was calling them to begin with. And so I'm curious your thoughts on just kind of like this moment that we're in as Christians today, and I want to ask you about like some of the cultural, battles that are happening where Catholics and Protestants work together, of course.
Sure.
But this cultural moment where I think there is a lot of opportunity for people to really know what the Catholic Church teaches, when before there were maybe a lot of misconceptions. And that's because of your work and the work of others who are able to share it and be apologists. But then when people, again, are raised with the church, or they are pastoring the church, or their whole community and world and spiritual experience is that church, even if intellectually they're like, yeah, you're right, this all makes sense. Taking that step of like, okay, how do I even become Catholic now when literally I'm getting my spiritual nourishment from this beautiful Protestant church that I'm, from? Yeah. What do you say to folks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, it was really about the trajectory I was on, because the question I was wrestling with was, how do I know the way that God has intended to communicate the gospel to the world? And I was like, show me the truth. Show me the truth. I wanted to find that. But I also recognized that I was on a journey, and there were plenty of years of my life when I wasn't at that place in terms of Catholicism. So people will ask me, they're like, well, do you think that everything that you did in the past was wrong? Do you feel like, when my kids would wrestle with that, sometimes they say, we feel like everything you taught us in the past was wrong. And I would say, no, that's not what I think about it at all. I think that what I've experienced in Catholicism is like the fullness of that, but that doesn't take away from the things that were true before. And I think that if we just come out telling everybody that, well, if you're not Catholic, then you're not a real Christian, or you're a second-class, like, I don't think that's helpful to anybody. But in the same way, we get that oftentimes too. Well, you're idolaters, you're all this. So for me, like, the thing I want to like help people be unified in their relationship with God. And the best way to do that is for people to know what they're talking about. For people, whether they're Protestant or whether they're Catholic, to know what the church actually teaches. Because what I find to be the case is most of the people that are so super against the Catholic Church It's because they have a false view of it. You know, I mean, Archbishop Fulton Sheen talked about that, you know, years ago. It's still true to this day that people have a lot of misconceptions. And so I think if what we can do is not go to someone and be like, hey, let me tell you why you need to be Catholic. What I've learned in my work today, I don't ever have to do that. What I do is explain to people what the Catholic Church is and leave it to God in their life. And that has been extremely powerful, because the other thing that it's done is it's taken the pressure off me to try to be like compelling or clever or some sort of like, oh, well, I've got the secret sauce to make somebody Catholic. I don't. People ask me all the time, what do I have to do to make my so-and-so Catholic or make this person Catholic? And I'm like, you can't do that. That's got to be the work of the Holy Spirit. What you can do and what I can do is, as Catholics, we can model the faith to people with two things that I think are the most critical. They are joy and devotion. Because Beautiful. If we have one without the other, we're not going to do a great job. And we've all seen what devotion without joy looks like. It's, you know, the grouchy Catholic that knows all the prayers, but is just, you know, not nice to people. And we all know what joy but no devotion looks like. Oh yeah, everything's great, whatever, but they don't practice the faith. Yeah. So we have to model those two things together. And I find that if we just do that and leave the rest to God and make ourselves available in relationship with people, he's going to work on that.
Do you see that with your ministry, that there's a lot of people who are not Catholic, but who are like, yeah, like I'm being fed by what Keith is sharing here. This is bringing me closer to Jesus, even if they're not fully in on Catholic, like that they haven't connected all these dots yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have people. So we have this online rosary community that we do. We've been doing it every day for 5 years. And we pray the rosary every day. It started in 2020 because of the pandemic. I'd never thought I would ever do that. And it's become this huge thing. And there are people who aren't Catholic that pray the rosary with us. And, you know, what we say is we tell them, you're welcome. You're a part of this family, just like everybody is. And there are plenty of people that comment on my videos regularly that are not Catholic. Some of them push back, and they push back in love. Some push back not in love, but I welcome that. Whenever I run into someone who's like, hey, just want to, you know, I'm not Catholic, but they're nice, I try to always respond to those comments. Like, oh, thank you so much for being here. We did a pilgrimage to Rome recently, and one of the people on our trip was very, very not Catholic. And he said to me, well, I just want you to know, you know, I'm kind of the outcast here because I'm not Catholic on this pilgrimage. And I looked at him, I said, you are not an outcast, brother. You are our treasured guest.
Beautiful.
We're here for you, man. We're so thankful that you are here, because I remember what it was like to be that guy. And I remember some things that were unhelpful that people said to me, Catholics, you know, they would make comments to me or talk down to me and made me feel like, well, because I wasn't Catholic, I didn't belong, or I was missing something. And the truth is, looking back on it now, I can go, yeah, okay, I was missing some things. But what I needed, and what a few people gave me that really hung with me, was they gave me the space to just process what I was processing, even when I was telling them to their faces that they didn't have the truth. They weren't doing it right. They hung in there with me. And to me, I feel like that's what we're all supposed to do with each other.
Incredible. There's this thought experiment I'd love to get your thoughts on. When I think about church, you know, the church, and Jesus was saying, you know, they will know you're Christians by your love. Like he wants us to be one, you know, we are one body. And you see divisions within the Christian people of, you know, denominations, or, you know, also there's just infighting over any number of things that might happen, you know, wars or turf wars or just stuff, right? It's humanity. But I think about all of these amazing, you know, Protestant pastors. I think about our Orthodox bishops, right? Their Eucharist is valid but not licit, right? So it's actually Jesus' body, blood, soul, and divinity. It's the line of apostolic succession for the Orthodox Church as Catholics see it. But, you know, they're out of line with Rome, right?
Right.
So there's all of these, you know, fractures. And, you know, I think about particularly our Protestant brothers and sisters, though. What would it look like what kind of space can we make kind of, you know, with our Catholic infrastructure for the incredible giftedness that so many of these Protestant pastors have, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And one thing that just has come to mind, we had Deacon Charlie Echeverry on the show recently and his wife, and he was in Rome just a few weeks ago. He was telling me about this. He's a deacon.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, if I remember this correctly, there's only 40,000 deacons in the entire church globally.
Really? I didn't know that. Wow.
And 4,000 of them showed up in Rome for this special, bringing in more deacons. I don't know what the technical word is. This is my ignorance, but he was saying about 40,000 globally. And I think of the priesthood, it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions in the priesthood. I don't know that number. That's an interesting number. But I'm bringing this up. Sorry, this is a long-winded way to get here, because I think about all of these amazing pastors. You were a pastor who have this calling, who have these gifts, who have these abilities. And how do we make space for them in the Catholic Church? I mean, that's honestly something I've thought about. Like, what does that look like? Can they become, because deacons can baptize, deacons can marry, deacons can preach. They can be married themselves.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the diaconate is a space for people who convert. There are converts that become Catholic priests with families. So there is provision for that. I think it's important that everybody follows their calling, though. People ask me all the time, are you going to become a deacon? Why aren't you a deacon? And honestly, I'm like, I can't imagine having the time to go to deacon school with all the stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah.
But I think there's where I thought you were going with that, which I thought was really interesting too, is there a way for us, even with Protestants, to find spaces where we can be together? And the answer to that, I think, is kind of like what you do, like with your pro-life work. We can find the things that we both believe in strongly and link arms together and say, hey, we're coming together in these spaces against a world that we both agree needs to be reached with the gospel. And I think the more we do that, the better off we all are. Because the reality is we can be sharpened by our non-Catholic brothers and sisters 100%. In a lot of ways. And I like to think that they can be sharpened by us too. But what we have to do is have openness and acceptance of who we each are. So, and a lot of that means we have to have grace for one another. And as a convert, it might be easier for me than it is for some people, because I can so clearly identify with where that person's heart is, who loves the Lord and wants to follow Jesus, but grew up with a misunderstanding of Catholicism and doesn't get that. And I just go, if they only knew, maybe that would change. And I've seen it happen many times, but it won't happen if we just wall ourselves off from everybody and look down our nose at the rest of the world and say, sorry, you're not real like us or whatever. So I think we have to have that openness, and we have to have that invitational spirit and that incarnational spirit where we're willing to go and be with people in those spaces without acting like we've, in some way compromised ourselves.
It's so beautiful. 100%. Keith, what is ministry looking like for you these days? And how can people find your work? Well,
ministry for me is looking like a lot of, I do a lot of stuff on YouTube. So I do a daily live stream on a channel. I have 2 YouTube channels. One's just called Keith Nestor and one's called Rosary Crew with Keith Nestor. That's the one where there's the prayer every day. On my regular YouTube channel, I make a weekly podcast video called Unpacking the Mass, where I do like a weekly walkthrough of the readings. And it's sort of like, it kind of scratches my preacher's itch, where I take the scriptures and I walk through them. And I tell people, like, this is not to take the place of your priest's homily. This is to give you ears to hear it. So we're going to walk through the readings so that when you go to Mass, you're ready to hear what the Spirit wants to say to you.
I love that.
So that's my favorite thing I get to do, is unpacking the Mass. And then I do long form interviews on my channel too. I travel around and give parish missions. I've got 2 books out, the Convert's Guide book, and then a book about the mysteries of the Rosary as well. And then the other thing I love to do more than anything is just be on the journey with people. So I have a lot of people that contact me that are like, hey, I'm in that place where you were. What do I do? So I do a lot of meetings with people that are just try to help them in that space as well.
I have to ask you one more thing
before
I let you go, because looking back on your whole story, there's so many points where obviously you're sharing God speaking to you, God working with you. I'm curious, when you look back and you see really God calling you to that youth group, and then God calling you to that Methodist church, and then God calling you to fully enter the Catholic Church, right?
Mm-hmm.
going to that youth group and being a pastor wasn't being a Catholic yet, obviously,
Right.
but it was the same God who called you.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, especially for people listening, wherever they are on their faith journey, if you have any thoughts just about the mysterious way that God calls us to things that aren't maybe the ultimate thing that he's leading us towards yet. I mean, the ultimate thing is eternity with him, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, they're just the mysterious workings of God.
That's the adventure of faith, Lila. There's no, this is the way it is for every single person, A, B, C, D. You know, God works with our humanity and he guides us on that journey of life and faith. And that's going to look different for different people. And, you know, I spend time sometimes looking back on, oh, I wish I would have done this, wish I would have done that. But I always take the advice of people who say that you shouldn't do that because that's what God used to get you where you are. And, you know, my wife and I were talking about this the other day about all the different little paths life can take, you know, and different things that could have happened in our lives and in our ministry and in our career. And what if we wouldn't have gone there? And what if we wouldn't have gone there? And I just said to her, I said, you know, what's amazing to me is that nobody has a crystal ball to see any of that stuff, right? We don't know, but I can't imagine doing anything better, a better scenario than where I am today. And I know that doesn't happen without all those things in the past. So God uses all of those things. I mean, I think about the last verse in the book of Genesis, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And that just basically is a testimony to the fact that wherever we are in our brokenness or in what we think we're doing is right, the answer is the same. Offer it to Jesus. Give him everything. He's inviting you on this journey of radical discipleship. And that's not just for the advanced Christians. That's Christianity. Christianity is not what I used to think it was. Hey, God, I'll do the things I want to do and hopefully you'll bless it if I'm a good boy. No, Christianity is this covenant where he gives us himself and we give him ourselves. And then he calls us on this journey to follow him. That's discipleship. There's no plan A, plan B, plan C when it comes to God. The plan is the road of discipleship. The question is, will we pick up our cross and follow him? It's not an easy road. Jesus never said it would be. But if we stick with him and we follow him, then he's promised that he'll never leave us and he'll get us to where we need to be.
Amen. Thank you, Keith. This has been awesome. Very inspiring for me, and I'm sure folks listening.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And a huge thank you to EWTN, Eternal Word Television Network, which is the largest religious broadcaster in the world. You can get access to Lila Rose Show episodes 24 hours in advance at EWTN.com/on-demand. And a big thank you to EWTN and their incredible mission to bring souls to Jesus.